Here we go.
This is okay. Another surprise for you. Okay, good morning to everybody who has just joined us on LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook as well. We already said good morning to the family, Japanese Politics One-on-One family in Clubhouse. Thank you very much for being here once again. This is thanks to Timothy Langley, who has a couple of things to tell us that haven't been in the news yet. However, well, I'm not going to keep you waiting for very long because we have just 30 minutes or so to talk about what is happening right now in Japanese politics, and from there transition into the questions and answers session. So, Timothy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maya. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 149th consecutive Sunday together, talking about Japanese politics. As you know, we try and compile this into a tight 30-minute briefing. I'll do my best to state that today again, although there is a lot going on, and as Maya suggested, there's a lot going on in the background that has not yet hit the news yet, but we anticipate it. We're closing out the year. Today is December 17th, 2023, and it just looks like the ball is beginning to roll. So I think we'll end the year Japanese politics-wise with a real bang, not with a whimper. But let me get into the most critical things that have happened. If most of you are watching, just following the news and then keeping an eye out for Japanese politics, you'll notice that this last week has been extremely active, and not just at the surface level, but also tectonically. And it is so massive what's going on, and so influential to what's going on long-term in Japanese politics, that we will have a special session of this. Maya, I think this is still on schedule for shooting next week, if
Yes,
I'm right. Okay,
yes,
so it'll be with me and Dan Harada. I think most people know who Dan Harada is. He is a political fixture for the last 35 years in LDP politics. And he and I will be doing a joint briefing, maybe 30 minutes, depends on how much we can cover on that. We should upload it maybe on Thursday or Friday live. So for those of you who know about it or who get a notice on LinkedIn or on YouTube, we'll be shooting that and you can see it live, and then we'll recompile it, take out all of the times where I say and reduce it down to something that's actually a reasonable time frame.
right,
And repost it, right?
Right, exactly like that. Yes, we will run it live, and then a couple of days later, once again, yes, all the silent places will be taken away, and then it will be up there for everybody to see again. Yes. Okay, Timothy.
Thank you very much. So as you know, Dan Harada and I do a tit-a-tat every once in a while if there's a cabinet reshuffle or a change in the government. Dan is well steeped in LDP politics in particular. And so I think it'll be something that we will all enjoy and learn from. So please stay tuned for that. And the reason why we're doing that is because just in a 30-minute briefing that I'm offering you today, I can only cover the basic stuff. And today I won't be really getting much into geopolitics or what's going on regionally, militarily, with the Ospreys, with the Tomahawks. There has been some movement on the Tax Council for funding the defense spending. They had a meeting just after the extraordinary cabinet, the extraordinary diet session ended on Wednesday. But there's a lot going on. But let's just get down to what's going on in Japanese politics with regard to the cabinet, with Mr. Kishida, with his approval rating, and most importantly, with the political funding scandal that has emerged over the last 2 weeks. So for those of you in the audience who continue to join us, and by the way, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Maya, and I really look forward to seeing you every week. And also, it helps us generate our energy and our spirit, knowing that you're there and knowing that you continue to rely on us for, the insight of what's going on, because there's just so few avenues to receive this. So we appreciate that. And we strive to really deal with the issues that are important to you. So getting into the details, the extraordinary session of the Diet ended on Wednesday. This was predominantly by Mr. Kishida to deal with a supplemental budget to deal with the decline in the yen and the inflation, that sort of thing. But actually, it was a cover for lots of other things that were passed in the meantime. For example, the bill on marijuana, the bill on supplemental drugs, on supplementing income for lower income, and also for kind of knocking the teeth out of this new political party that was set up by Mai Hara called the Free Education Party. That's a splinter out of the DPP. And he's come up with a plan now for universal education for initially for people who meet an economic test. So if you have 3 children, education will be free up into university for free. And that is actually that's the name of the party for this new splinter opposition group. Probably 5 members it has right now. But there's a lot going on there, as we reported last week. Even the governor of Tokyo is jumping on that bandwagon and offering free education for needs-tested parents. But anybody who's coming in with 3 children already are getting a bit of a free ride. So there's a lot of energy being devoted there. But in spite of all of those other things that are really important and tell us a lot about how politics is moving, how the economy is moving, and what is the direction of the political world here, we have to talk about this political scandal. And the reason it's so important is because of the 5 political factions, the Abe faction is by far the largest, 98 members. It was 100 members until just recently, and then the former Speaker of the House, he passed away, unfortunately, about a month ago. And so that dropped the political faction down to 99, and that's where it stands right now. But it wields considerable power. Let me just give you a couple of numbers here to put it in a bit of perspective. And I'm sorry I don't have a graph for you. Dan and I will have a graph prepared for you. But in this briefing, you just have to listen to me read it out, and hopefully it'll convey the picture of it. But with regard to the Seiwakai, that's formerly known as the Abe faction. Maybe it's still known as the Abe faction. But Seiwakai has 99 members. That's 22% of the LDP. The next up is Mr. Aso's faction. That's Shikokai. That has 56 members. That's 15% of the LDP. This is upper house and lower house. The next one is Heisei-kai. That's led by Mr. Motegi. It has 53 members, comprising of 14% of the LDP. Kochikai has no leader right now because the leader just resigned last week. The former leader of Kochikai was Mr. Kishida. It has 46 members, and that comprises 12% of the LDP. Shisui-kai is the Nikai faction. It has 40 members with 11% of the combined LDP. The Kinrimai-kai is the Moriyama faction. It has 8 members with 2%. And then there's a large group of teamless members. They belong to the LDP, but they don't belong to any affiliated faction. And that's 78 members within the LDP, both in the upper house and the lower house. That's 21%. So that's if those people who were not members or affiliated with a political faction were comprised as a faction, they would be the second largest, because the Abe faction has 99 members. The teamless, the members who don't belong to any faction, consist of 78 members. So with regard to how that works out within the Diet in particular, the LDP, of the 465 members in the upper house, the LDP holds let me see, where is this? 259 members, and that means they have 55% of the members of the entire lower house. In the upper house consists of 248 members, smaller in number, as you know, longer terms of office. There are 118 members of the LDP, which is about 47%. So in the upper house, the LDP holds a little bit more than a majority at 55%. In the upper house, they're a little bit lower. They have 47%. So in terms of passing bills, they can pass bills, they can railroad them through in the lower house, but they can't always pass them in the upper house. And some bills, if they go from the lower house into the upper house, it fails in the upper house, it can come back down to the lower house. The lower house gets a second bite at the apple, and if it passes the lower house a second time, then the bill becomes a law. But it's a not great way to do that. So of the combined total of the upper house and the lower house, the LDP holds 53%. And this explains why they have the coalition with Komeito. So it takes them over, in the lower house, it gives them almost 2/3, but there's a little bit more of a struggle in the upper house. But anyway, the dream is to have 2/3 in the lower house, 2/3 in the upper house. And when you have that, it's not just about committee seats and chairmanships and pushing bills through the parliament. It is also about revising the Constitution, which requires 2/3 vote from the upper house, 2/3 vote from the lower house, and then a referendum to the public, which at least receives 51% of the people who vote, not people who are registered, but on the Sunday that the referendum would be held, for the number of people who show up, if 51% vote for the referendum as proposed by 2/3 of the Diet, then it becomes a law and the Constitution is revised. So that's the kind of process that we've been in for a long time. It is a dream of the LDP. But anyway, getting back to the political struggle that's going on now with the Abe faction, with the political funding that has come up, we've been talking about this, we've been following it, but it's only come up over the last 3 weeks. For those of you who are following, it only became a big issue when the report was circulated by a professor from Kobe Gakushin University about something he had noticed about political funds that were generated by these LDP factions and the amount of money that was reported on their physical audits. And he noticed this discrepancy, and he filed a police complaint for nefarious use of political funds. And that's when it started. It started only, I think his inquisition has been going on for probably 6 or 7 months. He reported to the police, and then it began to hit the press about 3 weeks ago. And this thing has just tumbled and taken over the government, and actually dominated the political discussions over the last week within the closing of the extraordinary Diet session. So while the Diet was in session, the political prosecutors have been investigating the claims and talking to people. The members of the Diet, as you know, they're in the Diet at Diet hearings almost every day. And in the meantime, the prosecutor's office is investigating and talking to the staff and the political faction headquarters of the various factions and making good hay there, because the bosses are otherwise occupied, and the staff, without too much direction or too much oversight, because it happens so quickly, all they can do is answer honestly or be in trouble for, lying under investigation. So a lot of news has been coming out. And although the prosecutors can investigate and question members of the Diet, they can't really touch them while the Diet is in session. The Diet ended the session on Wednesday, and then the public prosecutors really began to move in. There are a couple of things that happened as a consequence of this movement from the public prosecutor's office. The first one was that the the Abe faction really receiving a lot of critical blame for that, but actually they have discovered that of the 6 factions, 5 of them have been embroiled in it on a traditional basis. It's something that's part and parcel of factional politics, it has been learned. And the Abe faction, with being the largest faction, has been revealed to be one of the chief violators. And so they've been coming down hard on that. But it's also the faction heads. So the what they usually say is the fish starts to rot at the head, and then it affects the rest of the body. And similarly within factional politics, everything starts at the top. The key guy, the faction leader, is the one who really makes the decisions. And there are 2 complications here. With the Abe faction, there's no political leader there. There's not one person. The 2 people who could potentially be blamed for this scandal are both dead. The faction leader who was the faction leader during the Abe administration, and then when Mr. Abe resigned as prime minister and turned the reins of power over to Mr. Suga, Mr. Abe became the faction leader, and then he was assassinated. And so those 2 people could be blamed. But after that, there was this huge turmoil. Who's going to replace Mr. Abe? They could never settle it up. They could never decide who's going to be on first base, who's going to be on second base. And so they had this fight. There was a lot of falling out. A lot of people fell kind of by the wayside, were pushed aside. And we have this coalition of 5 chief members of the coalition, of the faction, who are guiding the politics. And it turns out that of these 5, all of them occupy seats of power and prestige, either within the LDP or within the cabinet office. So these guys are the ones that are kind of being blamed. With the Motegi faction, Mr. Motegi is under scrutiny. And with the Kishida faction, he is the one that's in the hot seat. And here's another problem that we have with Mr. Kishida. I mean, he's criticized for a lot of different things, but one of the things is that when you become prime minister, you're supposed to relinquish your political affiliation with the faction that you belong to. And all prime ministers have done that in the past, except for Mr. Kishida. He kept the head of the faction position, even as he was prime minister, quite rare, but he did that for whatever reason. And now it's coming back to haunt him. He resigned from that position on Monday of last week as the press reports began to really point the fingers for how a political funding scandal like this could have happened. And Mr. Kishida has been faction leader for, the last maybe 8 years. So it is quite telling that he became prime minister, political funding, squirreling away money, putting it in a safe in the faction headquarters, as all faction leaders apparently have been doing. So he's looking pretty guilty there, and he's beginning to distance himself. He's creating this wall of exclusion. So as a consequence of that, and as a part of that tactic, he's really identified and gone hard on the Abe faction. In the last week, he has removed any person in the Abe faction from the cabinet, from the vice minister's positions, from the LDP political offices, and he's really just gone, scorched earth on that. So in terms of the factional politics, so I read to you the percentages, right? The Abe faction, Seiwakai, has 26% of the LDP, and Mr. Aso's faction has 15%, and Mr. Motegi's has 14%. So when you become prime minister as a consequence of these factions working together and, accommodating you to become prime minister. So when all is said and done, everybody wants to receive their payback. So you would think that in a cabinet making up the prime minister who only held 12% of the LDP votes, he needs to share quite a bit of the political positioning. So the cabinet portfolios, you would guess maybe 26% goes to the Abe faction, something like that. And maybe 15% goes to the Aso faction, or something along those lines. There's a lot of horse trading there, and some political portfolios mean more than others, so you might get 2 for 1 instead of just a straight trade-off. So now that whole slate has been cleaned off. So although the Abe faction had, let's say, 26%, they don't have that now. The prime minister removed 12 Abe faction cabinet or senior government positions. Let me see. And in addition, he removed 11 junior members of the cabinet, 5 deputy ministers, and 6 political officers. And this was not because they were identified in the political funds identified by public prosecutors or even claimed to be guilty of receiving it. Their affiliation was with the Abe faction, so he did a clean sweep there. So on the one hand, he's created 99 new enemies in moving his policies forward. But on the other hand, he sure as hell has strengthened his own hand. One of the reasons why it's been so difficult for the prime minister is because although he only holds, let's say, a 12% weight of the LDP within the Diet, he really relied a lot on the Abe administration, the Abe faction, to help him pass bills and to get votes for things that he wanted. And he had to also, swallow his pride and horse trade and, kowtow to the Abe administration. It would have been a whole lot harder for him was if there had been a single political leader to negotiate with. And as a consequence of not having that, he's got 5 people that he's got to deal with, probably 5 people who he dislikes, but there was no single leader. So as a consequence of that, Mr. Asso's role as chief deputy prime minister or as deputy prime minister and Motegi, so the Motegi Kishida relationship is not very good. So Mr. Asso was in the middle of them, and so they had a little triangle going on. And as a consequence, Mr. Asso's role became far more powerful and influential in this dynamic. Now with the Abe administration or the Abe faction members being removed, it looks like the Kishida faction could be in ascent, in gaining more power and influence. But it really is, there's a lot left to be said. The public prosecutor's office is only getting started now. They've pulled in sources from all over, all prefectures of Japan, the political officers that have been stationed throughout the 47 prefectures to come to Tokyo to help with this investigation. It is a huge investigation, and there's going to be an awful lot of shaking out to go with that. And I can't get into all of the details today, and I apologize. I try and do the best I can with the 30 minutes that I've got, and that's why we've set up another briefing next week to give you the better details on that. There was a no confidence motion that was offered by the opposition party, but as I said, with the number distribution between the LDP and the other opposition party, the LDP holds 53% of combined houses. So a no confidence motion has real difficulty in passing. But they did also lodge a no confidence motion to the the chief cabinet secretary, Matsuno. Matsuno is in the Abe faction, as you might know. And the chief cabinet secretary is probably one of the choicest spots. Second choices is foreign secretary, but the prime minister frequently will come out of having an experience or a portfolio either as chief cabinet secretary or as foreign minister, as Mr. Kishida did. Mr. Suga came out as chief cabinet secretary. So those are 2 good routes to have. In order to become prime minister, you have to have 3 similar portfolios: foreign minister, perhaps finance minister, chief cabinet secretary, somebody of that caliber to be qualified as a candidate for prime minister. So Mr. Matsuo there was a no confidence motion. It did not pass, but the ball was already rolling, and he resigned. He was actually, I think he was probably fired by Mr. Kishida on Friday. Big shakeup of news for that to happen, and now all of a sudden things really begin to tumble. And interestingly, he brought in his number 2. So in the Kishida faction, the number 2 is Mr. Hayashi, formerly a foreign minister. it's important to kind of go into a little bit of background of this individual because he's from Yamaguchi, which is the political background. It's the political foundation of the Abe faction. So Mr. Abe's father and Mr. Hayashi's father, they had election districts right next to each other in Yamaguchi. They were fighting all the time, very famous fights, very powerful figures, neither of whom became prime minister, but they were struggling to become prime minister and setting the stage for their sons to take over their reigns, which they both effectively have done, coming from Yamaguchi, of all places. Mr. Hayashi was in the upper house because his father was still in the lower house. And he's been in the upper house for 5 terms. So that's 5 times 6, 30 years he's been in the upper house. In the last election for the lower house, he resigned from the upper house so that he could run, and he ran. And he is now a first-term lower house member of the lower house. So in terms of terms of office, he's Ichinensei, but politically he's far beyond that. He was foreign minister previously. He resigned so that Ms. Kawakami could come up, and she's also with the Kishida faction. And now he's coming in once again as chief cabinet secretary. So this is a big boost to Mr. Hayashi. You've got to keep your eyes on him. Although we haven't mentioned him very vociferously as a candidate for prime minister, this certainly places him in a very nice position for replacing his boss, Mr. Kishida, when the time comes. I'm not saying anything about a snap election or a no confidence motion coming up, but Mr. Hayashi is looking in a very good stead there. But the other thing is that with the Abe administration or the Abe faction now kind of off their balance, kind of on their back heels, and they're still going to be in the Diet, they're still going to try and influence policy and law. We're not going to see much happening now politically until the Diet starts again in January. So in January, we're on recess now. We're at the New Year's recess. The Diet won't be in session until maybe the 10th of January, and it will have its regularly constitutionally mandated 150-day period, and that's when they will pass the budget in April, and a lot can happen in that period of time. So keep your hat on as we go through that. Let me see what else is going on. There's also been some political rumblings, also somewhat targeted at the Abe administration. You might remember we talked about the funding scandal for Koto Ward in Tokyo, and the candidate for mayor there was accused of political funding violation for having a YouTube advertisement. She paid maybe how much did she pay? She not a whole lot of money, maybe $5,000 or $6,000 US equivalent for a YouTube plug that said something like "Vote for me." And this was a violation of the political funding law. And it turns out that she was told to do this, or she was advised to do this, by a member of the lower house. So her name is, what was her first name? Sanai. It wasn't Sanai. Yayoi Kimura. She had previously been in the lower house of the Diet. She resigned to run for Koto Ward. She won that position, and then in a re-election, she had to resign. And she was advised by Mr. Kakizawa Mito, whose father was foreign minister. He is a prominent member of the Abe faction as well, unfortunately. And he became embroiled in this because of the political funding that he was involved in getting her elected as the mayor of Koto Ward, where he also comes from. So he was trying to, build his fiefdom as well. it looks like he overstepped the grounds there. And now he is in trouble. He had to resign his position as vice foreign minister. His dad was foreign minister. He was vice foreign minister. He's on the way up. And it looks like the police are now investigating him and her for political violations. So when it rains, it's really pouring. Apparently, when you're in the Abe faction. The other thing that's going on in the background here is the volume of investigation directed at the Abe faction. And part of the reason here, and we'll get more into it when Dan and I sit down and talk about it, is that the police are they hold a grudge against Mr. Abe personally because of the things that he did while he was prime minister in holding over one of the prosecutors, the chief prosecutor, in fact, who was supposed to be retired, and Mr. Abe extended his retirement. You're not supposed to do that. It's outside of the bounds. But as prime minister, he did that in order to protect himself from the current public prosecutor who was favorable to his case in the Morimoto Gakuin scandal to be retired, and then his replacement coming in who had a bone to pick with Mr. Abe. So Mr. Abe didn't want that to happen. So he prolonged the tenure of the public prosecutor, and apparently that created a huge rift. And now people are out for vengeance, even though Mr. Abe has passed along. So there's a lot of complications, and there's a lot of history going on here that explains why they're calling in prosecutors from all over the nation to help investigate the Abe faction and also other members of the faction. So it's not just the Abe faction. I'm sure that the other factions and Mr. Kishida, in fact, too, will be implicated in this. In the question and answers, if I haven't gone into this, if you don't understand why this became a scandal in the first place, we can get into that. But I know I'm going a little bit long here. Let me try and wrap it up by talking about, when the axe fell this last week on the cabinet, there were 4 members who were taken out, 4 members of the Abe faction who were taken out, very prominent members, and they were replaced by, as I said earlier, Yoshimasa Hayashi, who became the chief cabinet secretary. He's from Yamaguchi Prefecture. He's a Kishida faction. Probably he's the number 2. I think he's number 2. He's probably Mr. Kishida's best friend. Then there is the Meti minister. He is Mr. Ken Saito. He was formerly justice, slotted over now to Meti. He's actually unaffiliated with any political faction in the LDP, although he's an LDP member. He's 5 times as a lower house member. He's 63 years old, and he is from Chiba. Then you've got Takeaki Matsumoto, who is internal affairs. He's replacing an Abe faction member who was internal affairs. He is in the Aso faction, 8 times in the lower house, 63 years old. And then finally, Tetsushi Sakamoto, who replaced the Abe faction member for agriculture. He is in the Moriyama faction, 7 times member. He's 72 years old. That's just in the cabinet proper. Within the LDP, with the administration there, all of the Abe members have been removed and replaced, and it kind of goes back farther as you get away from the cabinet portfolios and then the vice minister portfolios, and it goes. There's a little bit of a cascading effect that goes down there. And finally, just to wrap up, one of our members in DC, Camilio, who has been on in the audience pretty regularly for about a couple of months now, presented a couple of questions about funding. How did we get into this funding? How is funding done within the LDP? And he posed a couple of questions that I'd like to get into, and we can get into them a little bit deeper next week. But just as kind of a glancing blow, let me respond to those. Camilo, thank you for submitting those. And the first question was, with regard to LDP dynamics, how does the Abe faction now perceive its influence in the government? with in light of the things that have gone on now, just these last 2 weeks. So it's influenced because they hold so much power. They hold, 25% of the LDP when it comes to committee chairs, when it comes to votes that are being held. They hold that kind of proportional power within bills that are happening. Sometimes bills that are more important to them, for example, the integrated resort bill. It's a bit of a history now, but that bill actually came out of the Abe faction. It didn't come out of any one of the ministries, as bills usually kind of emerge through the ministries. That particular bill came out of the Abe faction. And when you have that kind of power behind the Abe faction, that bill will eventually become law because it's got so much of a push behind it. But in order to do that, sometimes the Abe faction needs to do some horse trading, and on other bills that are not that important to it, it kind of concedes on, or maybe even cabinet or committee appointments. So moving forward now, I think there's a bit of a pall that's over the Abe faction leadership. And although these guys have been holding committee chairs that held lots of sway, when they hold a political party, yes, indeed, people go. They go to the briefings. They are happy to contribute the political funding. People didn't know anything about this kickback scheme, but it doesn't sound too out of the ordinary. It's just that the reporting responsibilities, everybody suspected that those were being met. As the hammer began to fall this last week, there were 2 members who actually came out when they were accused, and they said, look, yes, I did receive kickbacks. I didn't report them. I was specifically told by the faction, don't report this and don't say anything about it. And when they were asked on television with cameras rolling, who told you this? Who specifically told you this? They just said, it was the party that told me this, or it was the faction leader who told me this, or somebody in the faction, without actually fingering anybody. So although they're beginning to suffer under the pressure, people are beginning to sing. And it's not just those members who are beginning to sing, but also their staff and their secretaries too, who really have been handling the money, have been under a lot of pressure and under the fear of being arrested or being prosecuted. They're kind of opening up. So the public prosecutor's office has a lot of information there. So I think going forward, you're going to see that the Abe faction has less and less influence on how the dynamics of laws and bills go forward. But we're not going to know that for the next maybe 2 or 3 months as this thing begins to shake out. And then Camilo also asked about funding. What are the main sources of fundraising, and how does it impact the overall process? So in terms of political fundraising, so that let's just limit it to one individual, a member of the parliament, who he wants to create a bit of a war chest. There are very limited ways to do that. Of course, the government gives all members of Diet some money to run their offices and to just manage their administration. That's not really fundraising. Fundraising means that they make speeches or that people donate to them for one reason or another, but it has to be reported. And there are only a couple of legitimate ways where you can fundraise. You can't really do tit for tat. So somebody calls up and says, my son was involved in an automobile accident. Could you please help by calling the guy and just giving him a little bit of a push so that my son gets off? That happens all the time. But you can't go in and, give him a box of cookies with an envelope under it. And if you do, you're supposed to report that. Both sides are supposed to report that. So if the first side doesn't report it, it's unlikely that the receiving side is going to report it either. That's how a lot of politicians and their secretaries have gotten into trouble. So the most legitimate way is to be prominent on the speaker's tour or publishing a book. You can publish a book and say, look, it's a lousy book, I know that, but please buy it because it helps me politically. So there's a lot of that. And just giving interviews helps boost the number of people who will attend your political briefings. And sometimes what people will do is they'll buy tickets, but they won't go. So you can buy 5 tickets. The company can buy 5 tickets. Individuals can buy tickets for themselves and their friends. They can pay for the tickets, and then they can say, I bought the tickets, but I can't show up, or I'm not asking for a refund, that sort of thing. So that happens quite a bit too. But they've reported that. So that's the most legitimate and popular way of political funding. Also, if you belong to a political faction and you have a briefing and members of your faction come in and say something nice before you give your speech, then sometimes you need to share some of the funding that you've had with the political faction, and then you receive part of that as well. And that's also legitimate. And this whole funding scandal that we're in right now would have been a little bit more legitimate had people just reported about it, but they haven't. And that's the key issue here, is that they pocketed the money. They didn't report it on the contributing side. They didn't report it on the receiving side. And that's the core issue there. The third question that was posed was corporate influence without the diet funding. There's no super PAC as in the United States, and corporations can donate to individual politicians. So for many countries, they have political donation funds that focus on a political party or perhaps even a faction within the party. And that's not allowed here in Japan. What's allowed is corporations can donate to a certain amount to individuals or to political parties. But once again, it must be capped and it must be reported. For individuals, the number is relatively small annually, and the political individual, the receiving individual, doesn't need to report until it exceeds a certain amount, which is maybe I forget the amount, but it's not a big amount. It might be like 5,000 US dollars a year. And corporations are allowed a greater amount there, but that again depends on how large they are, how many people are in there, the corporation, and who they're donating to. And they can donate to several individuals at the same time. And with regards to campaign spending, Camilo asked, what are the limits on campaign spending? So with campaign spending, so when I was working in the Diet, since I was in a very unique position, they liked to give me an accordion and tie a chain around my neck and drag me to these campaign rallies, and I would play the accordion and do somersaults and that sort of thing. And so I was in campaign throughout the country and witnessed a lot of different things that were going on here. But with campaign funding, the government provides funds for each individual who is qualified to become a candidate. So whether you're a standing member of the parliament and you're running to replace yourself, or you're a newbie and you've qualified to become a candidate and now you're one of the 5 candidates for an open position, the central government gives you funds to run your campaign. It gives you enough money to hire people for your office. It gives you money for the posters, as you might see when you drive around town, those big plywood sheets where the candidates' pictures are pasted on there. So the government pays for that. They pay for the shooting of that. They also give you time on NHK to give I forget how much, might be a 60-second, 90-second pitch. Everybody gets that. You can also be identified independently from the newspapers or from the television as a person of interest, as long as you're not paying for it. So that's why people who are like rambunctious, Yamamoto Taro, or let's kill NHK, right? These people who have really stark positions, they get a lot of viewership, and viewership typically translates into votes. So you'll have candidates that do that, or somebody that's just got, a weird political position but very boisterous about it. They can actually attract quite a few votes. But in terms of political funding, they are capped, they're watched very closely. So what companies and individuals do is it's not a contribution of money, but it's a contribution of services, of people that are working in your campaign headquarters. They're doing it for free, that sort of thing. So in many of the campaigns that I was involved in, and in fact, this is how I met the current leader of Ishin. His father brought him to our campaign in Osaka and said, "Would you just give my kid something to do? He wants to learn about Japanese politics." And so that's how we met each other. And he actually was hired by the Nakayama office afterwards. But it's people who volunteer. They go knock on doors. They hand out pamphlets and that sort of thing. So it's not a very sexy answer, but it is the legitimate answer. Each campaign has enough money to hire a truck that's got the loudspeakers on it, and these are all registered, and the decibel limits are set, and that sort of thing. And they're all the same size. So how you outfit them, how you doctor them up with decals, that's up to you. But there are certain things that you can't do, and you can't have more than one. So people sometimes do that. They camouflage one, and at one end of the district, they have one truck, and at the other end of the district, they have the other truck. The other question that Camilio asks is, who's policing this? And typically what they do is, the Internal Affairs Ministry is policing elections. So there are election campaign violation auditors that follow this. But it's usually the opposite party. They're following you. They might have somebody that's following the candidate and recording and filming and pretending like they are a supporter, but also recording this. And whenever they find a violation, or you're not kissing the right baby, or you're not holding the play card the right way, they will report it. So there's a lot of backwash that goes on after the election. And people are saying, the votes aren't counted right. They cheated on this. They used too many decibels when they were shouting their name out in the cornfields, that sort of thing. So it's different than it is in the United States. And like I said, the corporate regulatory oversight and compliance, it's by the Internal Affairs Ministry. And Camila's last question was learning from a scandal. So what lessons can be drawn, and how might these shape potential reforms? And I can already hear most people in the audience kind of chuckling under their breath about what the answer could possibly be there. But I kind of tend to agree. The most important lesson here is just don't get caught. And I think one of the members who was cornered inside the Diet, and he said, "Look, yes, I did receive the kickbacks. I checked with my office, and they said, yes, it's been squirreled away in the safe in the office. And the reason why you did that, Sensei, was because we were instructed to do that by the faction headquarters, and we told you about that." And he'll say, "Yes, I remember that. So this is why I did that." But what was the point I was trying to make? But he did say, but I didn't think it was too unusual. I've been in the LDP now for 8 years, and this has been going on ever since I've been a member of the parliament. I didn't think there was anything wrong about it. I thought that was the way things were done. So there's this conception about how politics and money are intertwined. And in fact, it's true that money is required to make politics work. You can't have it without this flow of money, and you can't have politics work without intermediaries, without functionaries, without lobbyists. It just doesn't work any other way. It doesn't mean that everybody's evil or money grabbing. It's just how the process works. So this particular member of the lower house was admitting that there's not enough money to run politics the way we run politics now. And when there is a chance to squirrel some away to have a war chest for a rainy day, everybody is in on that. And it's not just the LDP. It's just that the LDP is probably the most prominent violator. And that's what's really coming to the fore now. So the lesson that we can learn now is, yes, that the Internal Affairs Ministry is going to be watching and, moving forward these political briefings, Hagimaskai, these Shuppan Kinenkais, the book publishing parties, that sort of thing will be under far more scrutiny moving forward. But there's a lot to be shaken out. And I'm sorry I can't get all to it now. But Camilio, thank you very much for the questions. I hope I've given at least something of a broad brush stroke. But based on the questions that come out of this briefing today, Dan and I can get into it a little bit thicker. And so as a consequence, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, just be aware that, if you have questions, if there are specific things that you need a little bit more explanation on, we're open to take those questions and to try and deal with them individually. Maya, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I hope I haven't gone too far overboard, but if we can get into the Q&A, I'm ready for that now too. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yes, thank you. So we have several questions, actually. One of them is on YouTube. It came first, and then a couple of others on LinkedIn. So let me start with the one which we got on YouTube first. It's with... Okay, just a moment. I'll have to find it. All right. So it says, well, should the current PM, should Mr. Kishida leave office, what would that mean with regards to the relationship with the Republic of Korea?
Well, that's kind of one of the beauties of government in general. I think you could say this about other governments, not just the Japanese government. But with regard to the Japanese government, the foreign ministry is in charge of that relationship. And I think most members of the LDP, at least, are favorable to developing relationships with South Korea. And South Korea, the star has risen between Japan and South Korea. They are making good headway there. And I think there's general acknowledgement that the relationship needs to be repaired. It needs to be better. I think it's mostly because the United States is really insisting on it. Both parties are kind of dragging their feet, coming to deal with that issue. There's still a lot of recriminations and reluctance to do that. There's a certain segment of the Japanese population. There's a certain segment of the South Korean population that just doesn't want to forgive and doesn't want to forget. And the violations have been too violent and they've been too long lasting. And the impact has been so deep that they can never forget. But I think over time, hopefully those will heal, but also the environment won't allow for this to continue too much longer. There's just too much danger going on with North Korea, with what's going on with China. China is the #1 trading partner for both of those countries. So some certain accommodations need to be made. And I think whether it's Mr. Kishida or anybody else, I think it's still going to be the same. The South Korea relationship with Japan is so vitally important. And I think it'll continue to get better and better. I certainly hope so.
Well, thank you for that, Timothy. If you allow me to proceed with the other questions. And we also have Yuka with us in Clubhouse. So Yuka, please give me just a couple of minutes if possible, and then we'll continue with the questions.
I'm trying to... No, just go ahead with those questions from LinkedIn, YouTube, and I can be the last one. No problem.
No, we actually went through the questions on YouTube, and then I'll have the questions from LinkedIn. I don't think that will take that long. Okay, so the first one, Timothy, it came, several minutes ago, actually. It is from Rumiko. And then what are your thoughts on Mr. Kishida's comment on the Osprey operation pause due to the current scandal, fundraising scandal?
Okay, a great question. And I wanted to get into Ospreys today. It was one of the things that had to fall off. I can get into it next week in our briefing. But the Ministry of Defense, the Minister of Defense, and the United States forces stationed in Okinawa had agreed to ground the Ospreys. They were grounded maybe a week, 10 days ago. And now that is going to be slowly released. Through that period of time, they've been doing the investigation to make sure that there is safety. And the Japanese have insisted, there can't be any deaths on Japanese soil caused by these machines, whatever they might be. But the Ospreys have a bit of a shaky reputation. Already one person had died before this latest incident, but this is a big one. 8 people died in one incident on Japanese soil. And I had initially thought that the reaction from the Japanese was so strong because there was a Japanese SDF individual involved. And I learned the next day that it wasn't. It was all American soldiers. But still, the Japanese are very vociferous that there shouldn't be any deaths that occur here because of equipment malfunction or accidents or that sort of thing. They're just very, very strict about that. Even if it's a road accident that's caused by a U.S. soldier, if anybody is killed, I mean, if they're even injured, but certainly if they're killed, it really sets off the alarm. So the fact that there were 8 individuals that were killed in that one crash has really caused great concern. So I think the Ospreys are here. They're not going to remove them. They will be back in service. I'm not familiar with what the particular comment was, Rumiko, of Mr. Kishida, if he said something this last week about the Ospreys, but I suspect that they're going back in full service soon if they're not already in the air now. But they're only grounded with regard to operations. With regard to search and rescue, they're still fully operational.
Okay, and so we continue with the next question there, again from Rumiko. So obviously Mr. Kishida, he is replacing ministers, which we can probably equate to a cabinet reshuffle, although it is not voluntary one. So what would be his motive for doing that is the question. Is he just earning survival time?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great opportunity for him. He overshot his mark. So the people who are in the Abe faction that he released, not all of them have even been implicated. They haven't even been accused of any campaign violations, but they're in the Abe faction and therefore they've been tainted. So although it removes the Abe faction from, it's kind of part of that question that Camilio asked too, the influence of the Abe faction moving forward. I think the influence of the Abe faction will be diminished. Number one, they never could get their act together and have a single leader. So it just has a very bad feel to it that these guys, these 99 members can't get their act together because they're all fighting with each other. I want to be first. No, I want to be first. That kind of a political situation. And also some of the fellows who were very qualified have been kicked out. They've been kicked out of this potential leadership gang of 5 because of the Unification Church or because of their affiliation with Mr. Abe or because of the political funds. So there's a little bit of bad blood there. It's all very, very under the carpet. But with regard to Mr. Kishida, yes, he wants to pack this vacuum with people within his faction, or more likely, people in the Aso and the Motegi faction who hold actually more members than he does in order to ingratiate himself to, yes, self-preservation, to keep himself going. I think that's the game here, and I think he will do well there. But at the same time, he's just invited 99 people who are very angry with him and who will be fighting against him. But at least he knows that moving forward. So it'll be the political dynamic now and the political dynamic that we had 3-4 weeks ago is completely different. So it's something to keep our eye on.
Great. And then one more question. So are any other governmental bodies actually trying to do damage control on behalf of Mr. Kishida?
Well, damage control. So you could say it's not just damage control. It's also, pushing the damage forward, making sure this machine, this opportunity is maximized. So the prime minister is prime minister of the entire cabinet, so the cabinet portfolio of which the police administration is, the cabinet minister there reports to the prime minister. So he has some influence there to kind of make sure, get to the bottom of it, make sure that these scoundrels are captured. But the more he pushes there, the more his name comes up, because he was faction head during this time too, and the Kishida faction was doing the exact same thing. So if he burns those bridges, he also burns his own bridges. And I think that the idea here is, let's isolate it. Let's find, a couple of people to throw under the bus and have them take the blame. So those will be the accountants, the chief accountants within the political factions, and the faction heads of the most violating faction. So it's not a 2-for-1 with the Abe faction. It's a 5-for-1. You've got these 5 people, and they all held, prominent roles. Now you've got them packed under the bus too. They're going to take the blame. So maybe we just stem the tide by really highlighting how bad these people were, and how we're going to be doing revisions of the control, and we're going to be reporting now, and the money that we should have reported that we didn't, we're going to be repaying now in an act of contrition, and then let's move on. I think that's how it'll work out.
Well, and then if I may actually extend the question a little bit more. So you mentioned that some people will, they will take the blame. And then what happens to them? Because some of them resigned, some of them were replaced. So what happens? Do they stay in the, let's say in the Diet? Do they stay in the cabinet, not the cabinet, but let's say other positions? Do they receive other positions in the cabinet, or are they sent to any other institutions for that matter?
No, so in the first place, they remain members of the Diet. Even if they're under investigation, they still remain members of the Diet until they resign, or until they're kicked out of the Diet for criminal violation. But even in that case, they would resign. They would turn their badge in, and that's happened in the past too. So at least they continue to stay members of the Diet. Whether they continue to stay members of the political party within the LDP can say, look, you violated LDP precepts, you've brought defamation against us, and we're exiting you from the LDP. So you become an independent member. Thank you very much for your service, but now you're outside of the LDP. You are an independent member of the parliament. Good luck with getting reelected. And then at the third level, they belong to a political faction within the LDP, and the political faction might say, look, you've really guided us in the wrong way. You've taken a little bit too much money. You should have reported that, and you should return that money to us. And as a consequence, we're asking you to leave the political faction. So you might be an Abe faction member, and then you resign from the Abe faction, and you become one of those 72 independent LDP members, right? So there's 72, there's maybe 21% of the LDP is comprised of people who don't belong to any faction. So you join that group. But maybe it's not a violation that damages the LDP per se, so you stay within the LDP. But other than that, you could be ejected from the LDP, you could be ejected from your political faction, and then you become outside of the political party and run as an independent. And there are a lot of people that run as independents. I don't belong to the Communist Party, I don't belong to the Independents. You should vote for me because of, my sterling reputation and the book that I wrote, and, how good I am on TV, that sort of thing.
Well, okay, thank you for replying to the questions. And Yuka, 大変お待たせしました. I'm sorry for keeping you waiting. So, yes, the mic is yours.
Thank you. How do I respond to that? どういたしまして? Is that when somebody said sorry? Anyway, okay, never mind. Thank you, Timothy, for a great mini session on public funding. I learned a lot, and then I have to make sure that I'm going to read your transcript later on. My question, let me briefly, I promise it'll be brief. explain to you that how I come about this question. So, the talk of the town this week is, the U.S. Fed is pivoting from, the tightening to sort of, loosening of the economy. So it seems like U.S. is managed to, to deliver the soft landing, sort of tightening, but okay, is that a congratulatory? Anyway, so then the question they keep asking was why Mr. Biden's approval rating is so low. Then I thought to myself, how people approve of a president? What is the major reason? And then my sort of thought extended to Mr. Kishida, and his approval rating is all-time low, right? Or
Right.
Stewart. So what is the sort of the standard that people use? Maybe U.S. is different from American. I mean the Japanese, but how people decide on that? Economy or scandals or all of the above, or it's different from a president to another?
Yeah, I think it's different in different countries. I think, the United States has this two-party system. And so the party that's in is always being attacked by the party that's out. And so you've always got this dynamic. They're always looking for, crooked toenails and hair that's out of place to attack the person who's in office. And it usually takes a little bit of time. Although Mr. Biden was in office, they began to attack him just from the very beginning. But as now we have 2 years ongoing, there's a lot to point at that he did right, that he did wrong. So there's a lot of ammunition that people can throw at him. In Mr. Kishida's case, though, he's also been in office for 2 years. He hasn't been under a lot of criticism. It's just that the opinion polls that are collected, so they do an opinion poll every second month. And the last one produced by GG Press that was just released this last week, it's kind of curious because they posted the prime minister's approval rating at 21%. And they said that was 23 percentage points down from the last time that they ran the same survey. I seem to recall that the last time that they reported the survey, it was also 21%. And I follow these things pretty closely. So I think what is actually happening is that his approval rating is in the teens, but they just didn't report it that way. And Gigi is not very favorable to the prime minister in any event. Of all of Yomiuri, Asahi, Keizai Shimbun, all of the people who run these regular surveys, and they do it kind of not together, but Gigi might do it every second month, and then in between months, maybe Yomiuri will post their surveys. But they interview a good number of people, and they report how many people responded. So in the last GG Press, I think 58% responded, and then they extract the responses from there. So it's just a calibration. It's just a thermometer read. It is somewhat accurate, but it's just a temperature read. It's not really definitive, but I think it's indicative of what the public sentiment is. If an election was held today, they don't say that Mr. Kishida will lose to Mr. Motegi, like they do in the United States. It's a completely different system here. But with his popularity like that, then his arms are tied, because the people who are in the cabinet are wondering. In my particular case, I'm working for the prime minister. I'm affiliated with his popularity. And as a consequence, my popularity too, no matter how well I'm doing or how poorly I'm doing, it's going to affect me the next time there's an election campaign. And I might go to the election campaign as he is, Secretary of the Environment, or he's Minister of Defense or something like that. And I'm going to get a boost there. But there are also other people who I speak on behalf of, who are within my faction, for example. So I will travel to their district and I'll say, I'm the Minister of Defense, and this candidate is a great candidate. But if the opinion polls say that the prime minister's approval rating is down, thus my approval rating is down, it doesn't have the impact. And the number of people who come to these political rallies and rah are not going to be that vibrant. And so as a consequence, you might not have the number of votes. And the number of votes, as we've long discussed here, it's not just, the people who are going to vote, but it's also these pockets of voters too, coming in from Komeito or from these sometimes religious organizations that support the candidate. And with those gone now, the other candidates, people from the opposition, or they might not be in the opposition, they might be non-affiliated, but they don't have the damage that candidate is bringing with them. I'm going to be with the LDP, even though the LDP is suffering from a low opinion numbers or low appreciation. I don't have that. I don't have that baggage, so please vote for me. And the fact that they might win as a consequence of that is very high. So I hope that responds somewhat. How am I doing? Maya, did you lose my mic?
Oh,
I lost
sorry.
it.
Yuka?
yeah.
Timothy?
Hello?
Just a moment. Timothy, can you hear us?
Yes?
Okay, good. Yuka. Okay, could you please? Yes. Go on.
Okay, so should I repeat the question? Sorry, audience, you have to listen to me again. Anyway, so you, Timothy, you said if the election happens today, he may be re-elected. Is that what you said? Even though that his approval rating is so low at 20%?
Sorry, did I jump off? Was my audio cut off, Maya?
So, did you hear Yuka's question?
I heard her first question and I thought I answered it.
No, there is a second one.
That she just asked now.
Yes, that Yuka just asked now. Did you
Okay.
hear this second
Yeah.
I did.
Okay, please.
Okay.
So,
he was going to ignore. Okay, fine.
No, I don't think that's the case.
okay. So what I said was, yes, let's say the approval rating of the prime minister is now at 17%. So that means that if there was an election held now, he would not win. They don't say that, right? They would say the approval rating of the prime minister or maybe of the cabinet is very low. And if there was an election held today, it is unlikely that the prime minister would succeed himself. I think they probably wouldn't say that. That sounds a little bit undiplomatic. And you always want to be on friendly terms with these guys. So they just report what the results are, that the popularity of the cabinet or the popularity of this policy or the popularity of this individual is this. And then they leave the rest kind of unsaid, as they normally do in Japan. Until it comes to an election, then they might say, here's the popularity. Should the prime minister hold a snap election, here's the 5 most likely candidates to replace him. And they might run something like that and hoist the names up without putting numbers on it. And then the individuals might say, no, I'm not going to be a candidate to run against the prime minister. I'm very happy as foreign minister. So they might take themselves out. And eventually there might be 3 or 4 viable candidates. And then they'll start doing their analysis of who's going to be on first base, who's going to be on second base. It's not as really stark as it is in the United States, though.
Okay, all right, got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuka. And we have another question in Clubhouse from Ferran. Thank you so very much, Ferran. I apologize for missing it the first time. So here we go with it now. Timothy, to you. Okay. Oh. Do you expect recent events to affect the chances of Kono, Takaichi, and other previous candidates for PM, for prime ministers?
Repeat the question. Do I affect it to influence or impact?
Yes, it will influence. Maybe I will start with the first one anyway, because it is basically the same thing, but maybe the first one is a little bit clearer. So it is, what will happen to the members of Seiwakai? I suppose that depending where they move to, it will strengthen the case for prime minister of previous candidates such as Kono, Takaichi, etc., or even Hayashi himself?
Yes. So let's deal with the first question. What becomes of the Abe faction?
Yes,
right?
First there. Yes.
So, not to let the cat too far out of the bag, but to at least push his head out a little bit. The title of the presentation that Dan and I will be doing next week is The Collapse of the Abe Faction. So I'm putting the cat's head back in the bag. So that is the title of the presentation. So I hope that wets your whistle a little bit. And with regard to the former candidates who were prime minister material, I think it doesn't influence them. Takaichi, you might recall, was the candidate proposed and endorsed by Mr. Abe. She wasn't a member of the Abe faction. She had formerly been a member of the Abe faction, but left. And as an independent, so of those 78 members of the LDP who are independent, they don't belong to a faction, she's one of those. Mr. Suga is one of those. So 78 members, that's 24% of all LDP members are independents like that. And it looks like that number is going to swell when all is said and done with the Abe faction. So I think that there will be a fracturing of the Abe faction, and it will dissolve into maybe 2 or 3 different political factions. And then the rebuilding continues. And then they will have to, assign themselves with any one of the other existing political factions in order to, stabilize themselves, to maybe get a ministerial portfolio for their political faction, and just to start that rebuilding process. I hope that's somewhat responsive. There was another part of that question, maybe?
Well, it looks like maybe I think it is all for the moment, but yes.
Go.
Okay, yes, but if there is more to this, Ferran, please let me know in the comments so that I can continue with it. And well, it looks like we otherwise. Okay, yes, Ferran says, thank you. I will definitely tune in for the talk with Harada-san.
Good, thank you
very much for that. Yes, okay, and then there are a couple of comments on YouTube from Hiroaki Nakanishi, and one of them is that, well, on the way, sorry, I just missed the timing, but he wrote, Ukrainian grains, battery power, semiconductors, ultra pure water, and autonomous electric vehicle truck transportation system are far more crucial. God. Yes, there are so many things. Thank you for commenting, Hiroaki, and for being there. And so I think that we can now safely say that, well, we have gone through. Oh, there is one more. Okay. Lose unifying force and resigning. Okay, so then this is once again in Clubhouse from Ramesh, who was with us last week during the tour, the West Odawara hike tour. Thank you very much for the question. So here we go. Will Prime Minister Kishida lose his unifying force and resign en masse? What do you think, Timothy?
No.
Your thoughts on this?
No. I think yeah, he has too much more fight in him, and it is very unlikely. He'll only be forced if there's a no confidence motion or the LDP force by himself. He won't resign. No.
All right. Okay. So there are other. Well, he's trying to hold the front.
That's right.
Yes, be there.
And his position now seems to be stronger than it was 2 weeks ago. I think you can say that.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Timothy. And well, I have yes. It looks like yes, we have exhausted even the questions on LinkedIn. So with this, I would like to say. Oh, you want? Okay, this. Sorry. Okay, so I was just talking with behind the scenes. Apologies for this. Well, Timothy, again, thank you so very much for having this time with us and for us for the briefing. We'll be here once again next Sunday morning at 8:20. So for everybody who watched us today, please, well, please be with us next Sunday in the morning as well with your favorite drink of choice. And also during the week on Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, we'll be in Clubhouse again. So if you have time, tune in and talk with us. Timothy, that's all for today. I hope that, yes, your day will be good and relaxed. And to everybody else, enjoy your Sunday.
Thank you,
Yes?
Maya.
Thank you.
Buddy.
Thank you very much indeed.
See you later in the week with Dan Harada.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.